You want to know what $62,000 sounds like when it rolls into your neighbor's driveway? It sounds like gravel shifting under tires that haven't earned a single scratch yet. That's the sound I heard through my kitchen window on a Tuesday afternoon in March, exactly 2 hours after my own son stood in my living room and told me he couldn't spare $175. Let me back up, because the man standing at that window isn't the man who'd been living in this house for 11 years. Not anymore. And you need to understand who he was before to understand what happened after. My name's Lloyd Baxter, 66 years old last September, spent 38 years as a licensed master electrician in Barrie, Ontario, wiring subdivisions, commercial builds, schools, the whole run. If you've driven through Simcoe County in the last 4 decades and flipped a light switch, there's a reasonable chance I had a hand in getting that circuit right. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it because a man who spends 4 decades doing precise, detail-oriented work doesn't miss things. He notices when numbers don't add up. He notices when a circuit's been wired wrong. He notices when someone's telling him one thing and doing another. I raised one son. My wife, we've been married 41 years, raised him right alongside me. He grew up in a split level on Bayfield Street, 3 blocks from Kempenfelt Bay, close enough that you could smell the water on a warm day. He had hockey from September to March, a decent school, 2 parents who showed up every time. He never wanted for anything. I want that on record, because it matters later. In February of this year, I had rotator cuff surgery at Royal Victoria Regional Health Center. Right shoulder, bone spurs, torn tendon, the full package. OHIP covered the surgery, the anesthesia, the overnight stay. What OHIP doesn't cover is everything you need after you walk out the door. My provincial drug coverage under the Ontario Drug Benefit Program picked up part of the post-surgical medication, but not all of it. There was a blood thinner the surgeon wanted me on, Xarelto, for clot prevention during recovery, and my portion after the ODB deductible came to $175 for the first month's fill. $175. I want you to hold that number for a minute, because it's going to come back around before this story's done. I wasn't broke. I need to say that clearly, because I know what people assume when an older man asks his family for help. They picture someone who's just been struggling all his life and finally run out of road. That wasn't me. I had a rural lot outside Bala in Muskoka, 40 acres my father bought in 1971 for next to nothing that had just gone conditional on a sale. Cottage country prices up there had gone astronomical in the past few years. The deal was closing in 6 weeks. The money was coming. It just wasn't here yet. And my IBE pension doesn't hit my account until the 1st of the month, and this was the 14th. So I did what any father would do. I called my son. Hey, I said, quick favor, can you swing by the Shoppers Drug Mart on Dunlop and pick up my prescription? It's $175. I'll get it back to you the moment my pension hits on the 1st. There was a pause. Not long, just long enough to notice. Yeah, he said. Sure, Dad, I'll come by this afternoon. He sounded fine. I thought he sounded fine. I should have caught something underneath the speed of that answer. I didn't. He showed up around 2, came in without taking his jacket off, stood in the middle of my living room the way a man stands when he's already decided to leave. I noticed a new watch on his wrist, one of those chunky smart ones with the screen that lights up every time he moved his arm. I'd never seen it before. Dad, he said, not quite meeting my eye. Listen, things are actually pretty tight right now. Ashley's Civic needed a new transmission last month, $4,000, and the mortgage payment jumped with the rate renewal. It's just a bad stretch. I didn't push. I've never been a man who pushes. 41 years of marriage, and my wife will tell you the same thing. I do not push. I let things go the way you let a door swing shut on its own instead of slamming it. I nodded. I said, all right, I understand. Don't worry about it. And then his phone went off. He had it on loud. I heard every word. Jason, she's all done. Details finished. You want to come pick her up before we close at 5? And I watched my son's face change. I watched it happen the way you watch a cloud move off the sun. The whole room got a little brighter for him in about half a second. The tired look he'd been carrying dissolved. His shoulders dropped in a different way. The bad stretch he'd just described to me evaporated like it had never been there. Perfect, he said into the phone. Tell Pete I'm 20 minutes out. He hung up, turned back to me with this quick, closed-mouth smile, the kind you give someone holding a door for you at a building you're both walking through, not your own father standing in his own living room. Gotta run, Dad. We'll sort out the prescription thing when your pension hits, okay? I'll let myself out. The screen door clicked shut behind him. Not a slam, just a click. I stood there in my own living room with my right arm in a sling and a prescription I couldn't fill, and I listened to his tires on Bayfield Street until I couldn't hear them anymore. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you I was furious. I wasn't, not yet. Anger is too quick. What I felt was slower than anger. It settled low in my chest, somewhere between my ribs, the way cold settles into a house when the furnace goes out in the night. You don't notice it all at once. You just gradually realize you're colder than you should be. Welcome to Dad's Fierce Revenge. Stay a while. This story will take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I'm glad you're here. About 2 hours later, my wife called me to the kitchen window. She wasn't upset. She had that lifted sound in her voice, the sound she gets when she's about to share something she thinks is nice. Lloyd, come look. Your son's over at Roger's. I got up slowly, shoulders still protesting. I looked out across the street. Roger is Ashley's father, my son's father-in-law. Retired long-haul driver from Penetanguishene who moved down to Barrie 6 years ago after the wedding. Solid man from everything I'd seen, quiet, fair with money in the way that people who've earned every dollar tend to be. In Roger's driveway sat a truck I had never seen before. Brand new Ram 1500, loaded from the look of it, tinted windows, chrome running boards, spray liner in the box, gunmetal silver. My son was handing Roger the keys with a grin stretched across his whole face. Roger looked genuinely stunned. Ashley stood off to the side, filming it on her phone, the whole thing recorded sideways the way people film things these days. My wife said something about how generous that was, how lovely, how Roger's face absolutely lit up. I reached out and let the curtain fall back into place. I did the math I didn't want to be doing. $175 refused. $62,000 delivered. Same wallet, same afternoon, different audience. I didn't say anything to my wife, not right then. There was no word ready for what I was thinking, and the things I don't have words for, I don't say out loud. I went and sat at the kitchen table and looked at my hands for a while. The right one still doesn't close the way it used to. That's the whole reason I was in a sling. That night, after my wife had gone up to read, I went into the bathroom and took out the amber bottle, 3 tablets left from the previous fill. I set them on the counter. I found a nail file in the medicine cabinet, the flat metal kind, and I cut the first tablet in half. The sound it made was small and dry and very final. Half a dose tonight, half a dose tomorrow, same the next day until the first of the month. I swept the powder to one side with the back of my finger, washed my hands, and went into the spare room I use as an office. I found the old notebook I keep for tracking maintenance records on the house. Furnace filter dates, the roof inspection from 2 summers ago, the plumber's invoice from October. I opened it to a blank page, uncapped my pen, and wrote 4 words. $175 refused. I clicked the pen shut, squared the notebook on the desk the way I used to square up a stack of job invoices before tax season, and went to bed. My wife was already asleep. I lay in the dark looking at the ceiling fan doing its slow circles, and for the first time since the surgery I wasn't thinking about my shoulder, I was thinking about Roger. Because in 3 days Roger was going to knock on my front door, and what he had in his hand was going to change everything about the shape of this story. The morning after the truck I made my coffee. I grind my own dark roast, habit from 38 years of early job site mornings, and sat at the kitchen table while my wife made toast and CBC played something low on the radio. She noticed something was off the way she always does. 41 years, she doesn't need much to read me. She set her butter knife down. What happened yesterday? Not a question. She already knew something had. I could have told her right then. I had the whole thing lined up, the prescription, the $175, the truck, the math. But I said I was tired. It was a lie and we both knew it, and she let me have it because that's who she is. She gives me room to come to things on my own time. She found out anyway, 3 days later, not from me. It came out at a Sunday dinner at my son's house. The 5 of us around the table, Roger included, the kind of unremarkable family meal that shouldn't carry any weight at all. My wife and Ashley were talking near the fridge at one point, and I was in the hallway, not trying to listen, but the walls in their house are not thick. I'm a little worried about Lloyd, my wife said, her voice low. His drug plan didn't cover the full cost of the blood thinner, and your husband said money was tight, so Lloyd has been cutting the tablets in half to stretch them. I just don't want him throwing a clot. Ashley's answer came quickly. It's fine, Mom. He'll get his meds filled on the 1st. It's really not a major thing. Not a major thing? I was standing in the hallway of my son's house holding a glass of water I'd gone to refill, and I heard those words settle into me the way cold water settles into cracked pavement in March, expanding, doing damage slowly. Then I noticed Roger was standing at the counter behind them, refilling his own glass. He'd heard every word. He looked up across the kitchen and found my eye for exactly 1 second. His expression didn't shift. He just gave one small nod and walked back to the living room. But he was doing the same arithmetic I'd done 3 days earlier. I could see it in the set of his jaw. Numbers either balance or they don't. Roger spent 30 years behind the wheel of a transport truck, and before that he ran the books for his father's shop up in Penetang. A man like that knows when something doesn't add up. And when something doesn't add up, he goes looking for the reason. He didn't say a word that night, not to anyone. 3 days later, Thursday morning, there was a knock at my front door. Not my son's knock. My son does 2 quick raps and then he's already reaching for the handle. This was slower, deliberate. I opened the door and Roger was standing on my front step alone. No Ashley, no pleasantries queued up. He had a white envelope in his hand, sealed, and none of the easy warmth he usually carries was on his face. "Lloyd, you got a few minutes?" "Sure, come in." He didn't come in. He stood right there on the step, holding the envelope at his side the way someone holds something they're not entirely comfortable with. "I'm not staying," he said. "I just need you to have this. Open it before you talk to your son." He held it out. I took it. "Roger, what is this?" He looked at me for a long moment. Something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not quite anger. More like a man who has looked at a disappointing thing for as long as he's willing to, and has finally decided what to do about it. "He thinks I don't know how he paid for that truck," Roger said, quiet. "He's wrong." He turned and walked back down my driveway to his sedan, not the Ram I noticed, and drove off without looking back. I stood on the front step in the March cold, shoulder aching against the damp, holding an envelope I didn't understand yet. I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, turned it over twice. Then I broke the seal. The first page was a financing summary. I read it the way I read electrical schematics, top to bottom, no jumping ahead. My eyes stopped about halfway down. Guarantor co-applicant, Lloyd Baxter, my address, my date of birth. I had never agreed to co-sign anything. I had never been asked. I turned to the second page. My name again on a signature line, and below it, a signature that was almost mine. The way a rough copy is almost the original, close enough to pass a quick review at a dealership processing 30 applications a week. Not close enough to fool the man whose name it was supposed to be. Behind the financing pages, clipped to the back, was a single sheet of paper in Roger's handwriting. "I am formally refusing this vehicle and returning the title. I will not accept a gift purchased using a fraud. I have notified the lender's compliance office in writing."
Roger.
I sat at that table for a long time. My wife came downstairs around 10, found me still there, coffee gone cold in front of me. "Lloyd, you've been sitting there for over an hour. What is that?" I didn't hand it to her right away. I looked at her, my wife of 41 years, who had spent the past week asking me to let things go, to take the half doses, to not make a scene. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt the low weight in my chest lift, become something else entirely, something cleaner. "Sit down," I said. "You need to see this." I watched her read, page by page. The color left her face. When she got to the signature line, her hand went flat against her mouth. "Lloyd," she couldn't finish it. "I know," I said. "I know." She looked up. "What are you going to do?" Here's the thing about being the quiet one. When a quiet man finally moves, people expect noise. They're wrong. What comes out of a quiet man who's finally had enough isn't noise. It's precision. It's the same thing that makes a good electrician. You don't flail, you don't guess. You find the fault in the line and you fix it properly. "I'm going to stop absorbing the cost of who he's become," I said. Meanwhile, my son had been making phone calls. Not once that week did he call to ask about the shoulder or the blood thinner or how the recovery was going. He called to talk about the Muskoka property. "Dad, once that sale clears, we should really sit down and think about the best structure for you. Maybe a joint account, simpler for everyone, especially given the size of that number. I don't want you managing all that paperwork alone." "At your age," he said that once out loud. "At your age, Dad." I'm 66 years old. I wired a 120-unit condo complex in Innisfil when I was 58, and I got every permit on the first submission. But sure, at my age. I let him talk. I said very little. I let him hear whatever he wanted to hear in my silence. He was making the same mistake a lot of people make about quiet men. He was confusing my calm with my consent. He thought a man who wouldn't push back over $175 was a man who'd long since stopped being any kind of threat. He had no idea I'd already started keeping a different kind of record on him. The Muskoka property closed on a Friday. The net, after real estate commission and capital gains, was $740,000. I didn't tell my son the exact figure. He'd find out soon enough. What I did that week was drive down to a law office on Dunlop Street and sit across from a notary and a solicitor I'd worked with once before on a commercial lease. Good firm. The kind my son had never once imagined his quiet retired father would need. I set up an irrevocable living trust, 2 appointments, 8 days to execute fully. The trust's primary purpose is a fund I named the Baxter Prescription Access Fund. It covers out-of-pocket prescription drug costs for seniors in Simcoe County who fall into coverage gaps under the Ontario Drug Benefit Program. Applications processed in amounts up to $200 per fill. That number wasn't chosen randomly. My son is not listed as executor. He is not listed as a beneficiary. Neither is his wife. There is a separate provision for future grandchildren. Direct RESP contributions administered solely by my wife. My son has no access to that either. The following Sunday, I invited everyone for dinner. My wife made a full roast. Her good Ontario lamb from the butcher on Essa Road, roasted potatoes, green beans from the market on Dunlop. She wanted it to feel like any other family meal. I let her have that. She'd earned one more evening of ordinary. My son arrived first, talking about some new client account at work before he'd even taken his coat off. His wife came in behind him, already complimenting the smell of the kitchen. Roger arrived last. He caught my eye once, coming through the door, a small nod. Ready when you are. We ate. We talked about nothing with much weight. The Leafs collapsing again, the ice going out on Kempenfelt Bay earlier than usual this year, the construction delays on the 400 south of Barrie. My son was relaxed. More than relaxed. He was expansive, circling the same topic every few minutes, different approach each time. Now that the Muskoka money had settled, this was probably the right time to get Dad properly organized. Joint account. Maybe a power of attorney, just as a precaution, just to make things easier on everyone going forward. I let him finish his plate. When my wife started clearing dishes, I asked her to sit back down. The table went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when something shifts in it that can't be shifted back. I reached under my chair and set the folder on the table. My son's eyes went straight to it. You mentioned getting things organized, I said. Let me tell you exactly how things are organized. I opened the folder. 3 weeks ago, I set up an irrevocable living trust. As of this past Thursday, it is fully funded and executed. You are not the executor. You are not a beneficiary. Not now, not ever, unless a court orders otherwise. And my solicitor has assured me that is not going to happen. My son actually laughed. A short, disbelieving sound, like he'd heard a joke he didn't understand. Dad, come on, you can't just. I already did. My voice was the same voice I used on job sites for 38 years when I told a younger electrician the panel was wired backward and I wasn't signing off until it was right. No room in it for debate. The trust's income is directed to a charitable fund I've established. It covers prescription drug costs for seniors in this county who fall through gaps in their provincial coverage, up to $200 per fill. I paused. That number seemed appropriate. You could have heard the furnace kick on in the basement. His wife's fork had stopped moving somewhere between her plate and her mouth. Roger's hands were folded on the table, and he hadn't said a word all evening. This is insane, my son said. His voice had gone up half a register. Over a prescription, Dad, I'm your son. You're a man who signed my name to a financing application without my knowledge, I said. You're a man who told me you couldn't spare $175 for a blood thinner while I was 3 weeks out of shoulder surgery, then drove a $62,000 truck to your father-in-law's driveway the same afternoon. I know who you are. That's the problem. I finally know exactly who you are. He got to his feet. His chair scraped hard against the tile. You're punishing me over $175. That's what this is. He still thought that's what this was about. My wife stood up at the same moment, and I watched her do something I wasn't certain she still had in her. She looked at our son, really looked at him, the way you look at someone when you finally stop trying to see the version of them you wish existed, and you're just seeing what's actually standing there. I knew about the truck, she said. Her voice shook, but it held. I knew he turned you down for the prescription. I told myself to let it go because I was frightened you would take my grandchildren somewhere I couldn't reach them. So I watched my husband cut his medication in half for a week and I said nothing. I am not proud of that. She took a breath and steadied herself. But I am done being frightened of you. My son turned to Roger, his last option in that room. Roger looked at him the way a man looks at something he used to think well of and no longer does. Tired, level. You had a good father, Roger said, quiet and even. You had everything you needed. And you spent $62,000 you didn't have trying to impress me at a family dinner. I never asked you to do that. I never wanted it. He let that settle. When I sent my written notice to the lender's compliance office, they flagged the application for review. Your guarantor authorization is being investigated. The loan covenants require full co-applicant disclosure. When that review closes, the full balance will be called due immediately. My son's face went the color of old drywall. How did you even? Because I read every document before I put my name anywhere near it, Roger said. And when I read what you gave me, I saw your father's name on paperwork your father never touched. My son looked at his wife. She was looking at him across the table the way you look at someone when a fact you've just learned has rewritten the past 3 years. I recognized that look. My wife had worn it in this same kitchen, reading those financing pages. Jason, she said. Just his name, just the one word, but the sound of it was the end of something. He left before the tea was poured, no slam. Just that same quiet click of the door I'd been hearing my whole adult life, every time I let things go instead of saying what needed to be said. This time I wasn't the one who'd let something go. He was. The lender's review took 11 days. The fraud flag triggered a full audit of the application. The financing was declared in default, the loan called in full. Roger had already surrendered the truck title in writing, formally notarized, the entire process done correctly, the way Roger does things. And when the dealership received the rejection, they repossessed the vehicle. My son was left with paperwork for a truck he no longer owned and a debt he could no longer service, built on a lie that nobody had asked him to tell. His wife took some time, went to her sister's place in Aurelia for a while. I don't know the full shape of what happened between them after that dinner. That belongs to them. My son called this house 4 times in the 2 weeks after that Sunday. I let all 4 go to voicemail. The 5th time, he showed up at the front door on a Wednesday evening, thinner than I'd seen him in years, like the whole thing had physically taken something out of him and not put it back. You destroyed everything, he said. Over $175. I looked at him standing on the front step where Roger had stood 3 weeks earlier with that envelope. I didn't destroy anything, I said. You built something on a foundation that couldn't hold, and it came down. That's not the same thing. He had nothing to say to that. You spent $62,000 trying to buy respect from a man who never asked for it, I said. All it would have taken to keep mine was a drive to Shoppers Drug Mart on Dunlop Street. That was the whole price. That was everything. He turned and walked back to his car. I watched him go. This time I wasn't standing behind a curtain, watching through glass. I was standing in my own doorway, arm out of the sling, shoulders still stiff but holding. I went back inside and called Roger. Not about any of this. Just to ask if he wanted to come by Saturday. I had a section of fence on the north side of the yard that needed 2 sets of hands, and he'd mentioned his back was giving him less trouble lately. He said he'd bring coffee. That was 5 months ago. My shoulder is mostly right now. The Baxter Prescription Access Fund has processed 14 applications since it went active. Seniors across Simcoe County who couldn't cover their portion of a prescription and didn't know where to turn. 14 people who got their medication without having to ask their children for anything. My wife comes out to the garage sometimes while I'm working. I've been refinishing an old workbench I picked up at an estate sale in Innisfil, solid maple top, the kind they don't build anymore. She leans in the doorway the way she has for 40 years, arms folded, just watching me work. He called again, she says. I know. He says he's been seeing a counselor, says he wants to sit down and talk properly. I set the hand plane down and look at her, this woman who stood up at a dinner table and said something true and frightening when she was terrified of losing everything. I love her more for that than for almost anything else in 41 years. He knows where I live, I say. The door isn't locked, but I'm not the one who has to start walking. She nods. After a moment, she goes back inside. I pick up the plane and go back to work. The maple comes up clean under the blade, grain rising smooth and honest. The way good wood does when you take the time to read it right. Outside, the September light is coming down across the yard in long, flat angles, the way it does up here just before the colors turn. That brief week when everything in Ontario looks like it was painted by someone who knew they only had a few days left to get it right. I built this life with my own 2 hands, the same way I built everything worth having. Carefully, squarely, one thing at a time. If my son wants back into it, he knows the way. But he's going to have to earn that trust back the same way trust is always earned. Slowly, honestly, with no shortcuts and no one else's name on the paperwork. That's not a punishment. That's just how solid things get made. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I'll see you on the next one.